Thank you for coming out here. My name is Doug, and we're going to talk today about wildflowers. So I thought what we would do is we talk a little bit about the wildflowers, what we carry, propagation, how to get them started, what you can expect, what to do, what not to do, and then we want to hear your questions, your experiences, and we'll field questions because wildflowers are not all that complicated, but we have plenty of gardening issues to talk about. So anyway, wildflowers this is the time of year to plant seeds. Not in the springtime when you see poppies all over the place. Then it's a little bit too late, unfortunately, maybe in April. So right now is a good time. And part of the reason it's a good time is that wildflower seeds need to go through the freeze and thaw cycles that we have here. In other words, they like to freeze and like to crack open. That helps to get them started. That's why springtime is a little bit late when it's warmer. So between now and maybe the middle of February is the time to get your wildflowers started. Some of us probably learned to garden somewhere else. We may have even grown wildflowers somewhere else. And because people will say, well, I lived in wherever, San Diego, wherever it might be, and I just went out there and I just tossed the seeds, and the wildflowers came sprouting out and so on. I wish that were that easy here. It isn't, and for a number of reasons. So there's a little more involved to getting them started, and let me tell you about that. And by the way, this Planting Wildflowers Garden Talk is available on our website. It's something that you can download. I'm going to be talking about a lot of these things. This is the how to do it, so they'll get started.
And if you sign up on the sheet that Doug's about to pass around, you'll get a copy of that handout, a copy of the video, and some other related stuff to wildflowers.
All right. This when you sign up here and add your email, you'll receive handouts like these, information about classes and other things. There won't be any other junk emails for anybody else. We'll sell our list. This is just for us, for gardening related material. And Ken sends out a constant contact email every week. It's always full of good information. If you know it already, not interested, you can just delete it. Anyway, so you want to plant some wildflowers. What you want to do then is pick out a spot in your yard where there's plenty of sunshine. I want plenty of sunshine. And then it's really best that you prepare the soil a bit. Now this doesn't mean that you have to rototill it and add bags and bags of manure, but you want to prep the soil. If your yard is a little bit like mine, it's mostly rock, and you're kind of lucky to have a good spot. But pick out a good spot, and you can prepare the soil. By that I mean, maybe you run a rake over it, pull weeds, remove the rocks, just try and get it ready to grow. And then you can put it down some of this water's premium mulch. It's a soil amendment. It's a form of compost, etc. So then you prep the soil. Then what you want to do is select the wildflowers you want. We have, down in the store, we have packets, all kinds of different wildflowers. We also have 4 different kinds of bulk mixes. I really like them. There's a poppy mix, there's a deer-resistant mix, and there are a couple in between. Each one of them has a little descriptive information about what flowers are in there. So you can pick and choose what appeals to you. Some of them have penstemon, some of them are more poppies, etc. So whatever you like, or you can mix and match. It doesn't really matter. You go in there and you pull out a scoop. One little scoop, which is a quarter cup, covers 100 square feet of area. So when you do this covering, you go back to the Water's Premium Mulch. You get a bag, which is this bag here, Water's Premium Mulch. Pour that into a wheelbarrow, and then put your wildflower seeds in there. Mix it all together. This is going to be kind of like your hydro seeding mixture. And there are a couple of reasons for doing this. One, you want to have an adequate and a fertile medium for the seeds to grow in. They just don't grow on top of rocks and clay or whatever we have, or decomposed granite, whatever we have in our yards that some people call soil. usually needs some help. We're all, I think, it's in that same boat. I certainly am. So you mix this up, you hydroseed it, and then you can spread it. And you really only want this to be about 1/4 inch tall. This is going to be on top of maybe the mulch that you've already got there. You prep the soil. Now you're going to add your seed mix with your mulch. Really important thing about doing that, and one of the reasons for doing that, is that when you scatter those seeds, the birds in your yard are probably watching you, thinking, hey, this looks really good. And we're kind of hungry, and there isn't much to eat these days. And we're really hungry, actually. It's cold, it's wintertime. So, as Ken Lane often says, if you just put those seeds out there and tell the birds, come and get it, that's going to be the most expensive bird seed you've ever bought. And so we hope and we try and protect the seeds from the birds. There may be some loss, just like everything else. You know, part of gardening here, we understand, we know and accept that there is usually some loss to animals. So, okay, you have a peach tree and the birds eat a few peaches, but you get most of them. I can live with that. You know, what I can't live with is having no return, having javelina, you know, dig up my tomatoes and toss the cage 15 feet away, that sort of thing. So we want to try and have some success. So that hydroseeding with the mulch, not too thick, but thick enough to try and keep the birds away. Chances are there'll be some loss. If things go well, it should be okay. Now, a couple other things that are important that you can sprinkle on top is our 744. It's our all-purpose fertilizer. Also, we have this humic. This is kind of like a soil amendment. This will help stimulate the roots and get them going. So those are these 3 elements in the seeds. Those are the things that we recommend that you use when you're going to prepare and plant the seeds. Now the other thing is, these seeds need to be moist. They're going to get the freeze and thaw. It might rain or snow, and that's great if it does. You don't need to water them a lot, but they need to be moist, and within 10 to 20 days, they should begin to germinate. If it's really warm and mild and dry, they may not do quite as well. And once they get established, you don't have to water wildflowers more than just occasionally, but just to get them going. You've got that difficult period, you got the birds, you got the water, you want the right mixture, etc. This is what you need to do and hope you can do. So essentially, I say for the first 3 weeks, just keep that area moist. So you all know what that means. I mean, if it rains, it's moist. And we're not talking about drip irrigation or flooding the area. We're talking about just a light mist with a hose to keep that hydroseeding mixture there, and keeping it moist. Now, once the seeds get started and the flowers start growing, you know, some of them, they're perennials. Most of them are perennials, and they're shade, sun-loving plants. The thing about wildflowers is you may not necessarily get everything you're looking for the first year. Some of the perennials actually flower in the second year. You may notice that quite often, around springtime, we're reading the paper, oh, the wildflowers are great in Phoenix and Superstition Mountain or Flagstaff or National Forest of Prescott. So you can have good years and bad years. It really all depends on Mother Nature. Usually what it means is if the weather is conducive, if it's relatively mild, not too cold, and there's adequate moisture, they're going to do really well. In some years, there isn't as much in the way of flowers because the weather hasn't been so good. So you can control this somewhat. You can add water. I'm not suggesting that you put your wildflowers on a drip irrigation system, but just kind of make sure that they keep moist. And if during the summertime we have a heat wave, you may want to water them occasionally, but you don't want to water them too much, or else you may get too much leaf and not as much flower. So that's kind of wildflowers, the beholder. But to me, poppies are beautiful. The color is great. So are other wildflowers. They're not weeds. They're wildflowers. And so that is kind of wildflowers in a nutshell. Be sure you'll be getting this via email, this information, and
to start the clipboards around so people can sign up. Did you already? Okay,
going
great.
around. If we need a second one, we've got a second one, but make sure everybody Get on that and sign up if you want to get the information. So I thought at this point, when we're done, we can talk more. I'd be happy to spend some time with you individually. And then you can go down to the store, get some help. We've got 4 bins, bulk bins. You open it up, and they're just seeds galore in there. And you would just scoop out what you're looking for, put it in a bag, take it to the cashier. And you can mix and match. They're all the same price. I think it's $9.99 for a cup, a scoop. And so you could, it doesn't really matter, you could do half of one, half of another, whatever you feel like. And as I say, there are 4 different kinds. So do we, anybody have questions? Yes, ma'am. So the question is, I'll just repeat the questions. Can you grow wildflowers in pots? Yes, you can. They may, at some point though, they may not spread as much because they're trying to fill in the pot, but that's okay.
It's really a spring phenomenon with the flowers, isn't it? Or can you get some that last all year?
It is mostly, yes, the wildflowers are mostly a spring phenomenon. That's true. So, yes, ma'am. Okay, so the question is about the proportion of seeds to mulch. And it's not really critical. Since you have, since you're getting, if you get this, you get a bag, it's a 1.5 cubic foot bag of mulch. And let's say you get a couple scoops of seed. I would just put the whole bag in there. I don't think it's really important. You could do most of the bag and save some for a little top dressing. If you saw seeds were sort of exposed and you want to cover them up, you could do it that way, but it's not critical. I usually feel like if I get a bag, I want to use the whole bag. I don't feel like having it sit around in my garage. And so, if you see seeds that will sort of pop to the surface, what can happen to them. So it might be a good idea to cover them up, bearing in mind that about 1/4 inch and no more than a 1/2 inch is about the maximum that you would like for that. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
And that would cover about 72 square feet.
Well,
Is that about right?
okay, so the question is about coverage. That's a good question. 1 scoop will cover 100 square feet according to the information that's on the bulk bins there. So that may get skewed a little bit when you're mixing it all up, but in general, 1 scoop, 100 square feet is the ratio that we've talked about.
The mulch itself, the bag of mulch should cover about 72 square feet.
Is that 1.5 is a quarter equivalent to 72? Is that what the math that you're doing?
That's, yeah.
Okay, that's sort of beyond my ability, but I believe you if that's right. Let's say somewhere 100 square feet or less, we're in that neighborhood somewhere. That's why I think to answer your question, the whole bag can be used, might as well, because once you're broadcasting, you're tossing this. The other thing for having the mulch is if you just toss the seeds, and that's we already talked about the problems associated with that. You're not even sure where they are, right? They're hard to see. Believe me, some of these seeds are really small, and so if you've got the mulch, that's going to stand out. It's a really fine product as well, but that will help you to know where do I water. Where do I try and avoid walking? If you see some evidence of animals coming through, and you'll see that, okay, there's an area, maybe I can reseed or do something like that if there are any problems associated with it.
Thank you.
Okay, so the question is the fertilizer, and do you mix it in with the mulch? You can mix it with the mulch if you want, or you can toss it on top. Now, when I use this 744 fertilizer, I have my unscientific method, which I've spoken to a lot of people about, is I grab a handful and I toss it. So I would say that you could do a handful in this 1.5 cubic feet, or you could just do handfuls on top and then water it in. Same thing with this humic acid. I don't think the proportions are critical. They don't have to be exact. The idea is that you want some fertilizer in there. It's going to help them get started. It breaks down, the fertilizer does, when it gets wet. It's a slow release organic fertilizer, so it's going to be there to provide some nutrients to the wildflower seeds. So
that just go on top?
Yes, yeah. You can just toss it on top and the humic you can toss along with the fertilizer if you choose to do it that way. You can just sprinkle it on top and then you can water it in when you close it down with your fine mist spray.
Is that a fertilizer? Is that also a fertilizer?
The humic acid, it really is more like a soil amendment than a fertilizer. So that's why we've got fertilizer in the medium in the mulch, and the humic acid is kind of a root stimulant, soil amendment type product. So, yes ma'am.
We live in the forest and we have lots of wildlife who tend to eat most of the deer-resistant, javelina-resistant flowers that we've planted. And so, how foolproof is the wild flower seed that you're selling here that might not happen?
Okay, so the question is about pests, deer, javelina, whatever might be eating, come into your yard to help themselves. I should say that, of course, there are no guarantees. We have a deer-resistant blend of seeds, and it may work, it may not work. And sometimes, for example, we always tell people that if you want to avoid animals, eating anything in your yard, grow something that's herbal. That means rosemary, lavender, sage, basil. However, some people have come in and said, the javelina ate my sage. To me, that's rare. That really surprises me. So whatever is in the mix for the deer-resistant mix is it's a mix of plants. I think there's a good chance it's going to work, but there are no guarantees. And if you live by the forest, then as you know, animals feel like your yard is open territory for them as well. So, yes, ma'am.
Are deer and pronghorn antelope, can we use those two synonymously? If it's deer resistant, will it be pronghorn antelope resistant?
I think so.
Okay, I'm kind of new to the area, so I certainly know I don't have
Do
deer,
you-
but I have the antelope.
Do they come in your yard? So the question about
yeah.
deer and pronghorn antelope, are they synonymous?
We use this.
In some ways, I suppose, except that I think pronghorn are less likely to come into our yards. They're a little bit shy around people, whereas deer, can become buddies with your dog. And they wander through, and unless there's something that really isn't going to deter them, they get to be pretty comfortable in the backyard pretty easily. So, yes, sir.
The planting area should be sunny. Now, if you have trees, could you spread the seeds under the trees? It's a little bit more shady, so basically sun.
Yeah, so the question is about sun versus shade for the seeds. Ideally, full sun is where they're going to do best. If you live in a yard and you've got some trees that cast shade here and there, they may not do as well. I think the thing to do is test that. I would not plant these wildflower seeds in an area that receives very little sun. Under the shade of a tree, sometimes there's more sun than we imagine. It may be filtered, but if it gets late afternoon sun, that's pretty strong in the summertime. That would probably be okay as well. And this is something you can experiment with. You may find that the seeds do better in some areas than others, and that's where you want to expand. Okay, over here, for whatever reason, seeds don't grow as well. Over here, they're going crazy, they're spreading. That tells you something. That's part of getting to know what's happening in our yards, where do things grow, and what grows best in what areas. Yes, ma'am.
So in the fall, things are just on a lot of way before, because we hate to cut out the debris and stuff like that. Should we just let it all lay till spring?
Okay, so the question is about maintenance. In the fall, say the flowers have finished flowering, I'd say if they're laying down, what do we do at that point? What's the proper thing to do? I think you could leave them there. If they look like they're kind of straggly and you don't like the way they look, you could give them a quick once over with a weed eater. Some people even do mowing. That seems a bit extreme, or you could just leave them be and see what happens. Eventually they're going to kind of die back like any perennial plant. And then in the springtime, the new growth will come up. So I think it's really up to you. How does it look? What do you want your garden to be like, during that fall season going into winter when things are dying back and becoming dormant? Yes, ma'am.
So I have a giant bank that's been full of weeds now, and there's a lot of remnants of weeds. So I take those weeds out, but do I need to put a pre-emergent down to keep, otherwise it's gonna be choked with weeds up there. It's a big rocky bank.
Okay, so here's a really good question. She's got a big, large, steep bank, fairly steep, I take it?
Fairly.
Yeah, and it's full of weeds. And the question is, do you want to add pre-emergent? The answer is definitely no, because pre-emergent works to prevent seeds from germinating. So first of all, before you do any planting, you want to get rid of as many weeds as you can, pull them out. But if you put pre-emergent in there to prevent the weeds from growing, that will prevent the wildflower seeds from growing as well. So you could spray the weeds on the surface, you could pull them out, you could maybe try and get rid of most of them and accept the fact that you may have some weeds with your wildflowers. But in an area where you're going to do seeding, any kind of seeding, do not use pre-emergent, because pre-emergent is specifically designed to kill or prevent seeds from germinating.
I'm sorry, I thought there was an interval where you could put it down and then you waited a while and then you could put seeds in, but no.
I don't think so. I don't think it would be safe. I found that sometimes the question is about, is there a safe period? Can you apply pre-emergent and then add some seeds later on? Maybe you can. I'm not sure I believe that. I think that pre-emergents in general have a pretty long shelf life because they stay in the soil. And especially if you applied them in the past and you continue to apply them, I think there's kind of a cumulative effect. So I would say pre-emergence and growing anything by seeds is not a good idea. So good question. Yes, ma'am.
The only thing I've had success with are my penstemon. The javelina won't touch them, the deer won't touch them, but the rabbits love the blossoms.
Okay, so everybody hear that? She had success with penstemon. And so it's amazing to me the different stories that people have, deer ate this, rabbit ate that. But then the next person says, oh, rabbits have never touched this one. It's almost like, it's anecdotal information. I'm not knocking it. This is what happens in your yard. Well, in someone else's yard, it may not happen. I mean, I grew pansies on my front porch for years and years in pots, all winter long, beautiful color. Last fall, late fall, the javelina discovered them. It took them about 10 years. But I tell you, once they found them, even if they didn't like them, they dug them up and destroyed them. And there are people who probably, you can say, look, they never touch my pansies. Well, they touch my pansies. Do we know why? Of course not. It just seems to happen. And it's sort of a hit and miss, and that's part of learning about your yard. I mean, you may have the wildflowers do well, they get started. Maybe it takes a little while for the animals to discover them. Maybe there's something better in the neighbor's yard. But then next year, the neighbors have moved away in the garden. They're not doing any gardening, and they come over, oh, look at this. This yard, there are these nice flowers. I mean, animals tend to like flowers. They're soft, juicy, etc. So it's constant struggle. The best idea is a fence. If you can fence them out, you're in good shape. Yes, ma'am.
Clay soil.
Well, okay, good question. Clay soil, do you have to prep it more? Probably not more than a rocky soil or whatever, but you want to do some prep with the mulch. You want to feel comfortable that there's going to be some drainage and that the seeds can take hold in the clay. And of course, I don't know if your yard is clay in spots, which some people, their yards are like that, or clay throughout. Whatever it is, some soil preparation is a good idea. So
The question was gophers, moles, and trampling. Will wildflowers likely survive some of that?
okay, so gophers, moles, trampling. I think that the wildflowers can handle trampling. That means, you don't want to have the neighborhood turn this into their hiking trail, obviously. Some walking on the plants, I think they can handle it. You don't want to you can use your own judgment about how difficult it's going to be. Gophers and moles, that's a whole other world. If they discover that area and they like those roots, they're going to eat those roots. Now, they may prefer shrubs. Who knows? I mean, I had a wonderful bed of red potatoes, and I was just about ready to harvest them. But guess what? The gophers harvested them the day before, because they knew before I did that the potatoes were in good shape, they were ready to go. So there went that bed of red potatoes. That can happen. Next spring, maybe they're somewhere else. We have a whole other class that Ken Lane does on gophers and moles and those kinds of pests. And if you're the person that believes that catch and release is a good thing, you shouldn't come to that class. Because it may offend your sensibility. Because what Ken says really is that it's catch and return is what's going on. So it's really either they take over my yard or I have my yard.
Right.
It's a zero tolerance policy. But I think that wildflowers, maybe the roots aren't quite as big, but if they're burrowing under there, then you probably are going to have a problem. So, yes, ma'am.
I'm in areas, several areas that have duff or kind of organic mulch, and I'm concerned, will this approach work in that? Because I don't want to take it out of the soil.
So you're wondering about whether you could plant in this organic mulch? Yeah. I think that's a good idea. I mean, you could, if you were to do that, my suggestion would be you skip that first stage of working the soil, the rough soil if you've already got mulch there, you're in good shape. I would still do the hydroseeding method on top of that. So you'll have this layer that's your soil, essentially your topsoil, and then you're going to put your mulch and seeds on top of that. I think that should be a good combination. You can just skip that first step of prepping the soil, getting rid of rocks and weeds and whatever other junk might be there. So, yes, ma'am.
How long do they bloom before they start?
Well, I think they vary, but I think it's a good chunk of the spring and summer. I think when the heat comes along, they're going to start to fade a little bit. But I'd say the mixes, of course, have many different flowers in there. I've forgotten exactly what they are because if you look at the 4 blends we have down there, each one has a list, which may not even be a complete list of what the seeds are. And as you know, every flower, every shrub is on its own schedule. But I think that if you notice, like springtime in the mountains and the national parks, it's a springtime phenomenon that they bloom probably in summer. As we get into heat, they may fade a bit. And if we do get a heat wave, you might want to just go back to the sprinkling a little bit. You don't want to water them a whole lot, but I'd say probably into the summer, varying. Yes, sir.
Can you mix your blends together?
Good question. So this gentleman is asking if you can mix the blends together, and yes, you can. You can mix and match whatever you want. In terms of, when you get the bag, you get a brown paper bag down here. You can scoop of this, scoop of that, mix them together. You can keep them separate, whatever you like. You can mix them, they're all the same price, so it doesn't really matter. You don't have to separate them for the cashier's benefit.
So
Yes,
are
ma'am.
you saying that some of the flowers will bloom in March, or are we talking April?
Well, a lot depends on the weather. But I'd say definitely by April, they should be blooming.
Okay.
March might be a little bit early. Ideally, by the middle of February, say by Valentine's Day, you've got these seeds in the ground, you've been watering them. 10 to 20 days after that, they may start going. So I'd say March is maybe when they're going to push up, and April might be when they flower. But of course, like everything else, every year is a little bit different and depends on the weather. But definitely, you should have some springtime bloom. And there are some flowers in there that may not bloom until the second year. You may have some green growth, but the flowers will be the second year. That sort of depends on the mix that you choose and whatever happens in the weather world and the gardening world, which of course is totally unpredictable. Yes, ma'am.
I'm concerned about water, because last year I did everything wrong, planted in April and then drowned the seeds. And so planting like the next few days, seeds now, we're still getting frost. Is that considered moisture for the seeds? Or when do we start watering, assuming there's no snow or rain?
Okay. So the question is about scheduling of watering and the weather. As far as I would not consider frost as moisture per se. Frost and a freeze is another process, which is a good thing for the seeds, because as we mentioned, we like them to crack. So the freeze and thaw cycles that we go through so often here are a good thing. This is what these seeds want. So the frost, the freeze, that's independent of snow and moisture. If you get some rain, some snow, and the ground is moist, and I mean right from the beginning, once you get that in the ground, you want to get that moist. It's going to keep it from blowing away, get them settled in, get the fertilizer and all these products working. So I would, and of course, flooding. No, flooding is not a good thing. But you know how on most nose hose nozzles, there's a shower selection, so to speak. That's what I would recommend. You don't want anything to wash away. You want it to get moist and start to sort of settle down and, you know, be in a fertile, moist growing environment.
So, if we planted them, let's say in the next few weeks, what time of day would be the best time to water?
Okay, so the question is about best time to water. Usually we recommend the morning is the best time to water. That way, you know, there's a little bit of daylight, daytime warmth and so on. Probably not watering at night when it might freeze. I mean, not that we know it's going to freeze, but not critical, but probably morning, when you got early morning sun, that would be a good time to water. Yes, ma'am.
I have a hill similar to what someone else mentioned, giant weeds and whatever. I've spent a long time taking the weeds out. 2 questions. Would you recommend waiting a year to try to clear all the weeds out before planting the weeds or the seeds? Sorry. And then 2 is, can it be mixed with like a low maintenance like meadow grass or something to kind of help keep that hill knitted, or not just mud, or you know, and not just weeds?
Okay, so 2 questions there. One of them is, do you work on the weeds and wait? I'd say if your hillside is overwhelmed with weeds, I wouldn't start planting until you've got some clear space, so to speak. If it takes a while to get rid of the weeds, I mean, after all, there are weeds that are very persistent, as you know. They're perennial weeds. It can take a while. You know, you can spray them, dig them up, whatever you want. And it's not as though you need to get rid of every last weed, but if you want what you don't want is to have the wildflowers and the weeds competing with each other, because chances are the weeds are going to win. So I'd say it would be better to get rid of as many weeds as you can. And then, as the second question then, we also have, the question is about mixing meadow mix. We have other seeds as well, where you could mix in, you know, maybe, say year 1, you clear the weeds and you put it in a meadow mix. Then you got sort of a wild grassy kind of thing. See how that does. Then the next year you could come back with the wildflower seeds if you wanted to. The meadow mix helps. There's one that's it's meant to rejuvenate and start new growth in an area that's maybe has been neglected and has become overwhelmed with weeds. So those are a couple other seeds that we have. They're not wildflowers per se, they are meadow rejuvenation wild grasses. We also, by the way, have grass seed. I know we're not talking about that today, but in case you were wondering, we have on one side 2 kinds of grass seeds for regular turf lawn, 4 different kinds of wildflowers, and then 2 kinds of meadow mix wild rejuvenation, so to speak, of an open area, somewhere that you don't want to especially spend much time watering, you don't want to have to mow it. That's going to be where you put this wild blend. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yes. Where do you harvest your own seeds, or do you purchase them from a wildflower farm?
We purchase them. We have, I've been talking a lot about the question was, where do we get our wildflower seeds? No, we don't harvest them, we don't have a farm per se, but we're very involved in specifying what we want as far as wildflower seeds. So we have little packets, and the usual way maybe that we've seen wildflower seeds before, little packets with seeds, and then we also have the bulk seeds. All those we get from different suppliers. So, yes, ma'am.
Should I get
Okay, the question is, do I add fresh soil to the mulch? You can if you want to, not really necessary, but if you feel like you've got some good soil and you'd like the real soil to get in there, you could add fresh soil to your mulch mix. Perhaps that could be your first step. Put a little bit of mulch, a little bit of real soil. So this mulch is intended to work on clay. You know, you could add gypsum. There are a number of products that you can put into the soil to help it be more conducive to growing. It just depends on how bad it is. So the second question is about sunflowers, and I don't think we have sunflower seeds in there, and if you're talking about the plants, we don't have those yet, so no, it's not a good time to plant them. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that the wildflower should sprout within 10 to 20 days. If we get the wrong kind of weather, we get snow, or we predict what's the effect on cool what can we expect?
Okay, so the question is about what could you expect as far as the germination? Now, in 10 to 20 days, approximately, and if things go well, we start to germinate and pop up. If we get some snow or rain, that's not a bad thing. It's cold weather, as we mentioned about the freeze and thaw cycles, that's okay. They expect it to have that. So a period of cool weather with a little bit of snow and a little bit of rain, not a problem at all. And what to expect, you know, it's kind of a range, so to speak.
Didn't want my hopes to be that.
Yes. So, any more questions?
If you're doing the 1 and 2 year plan with the meadow mix or something like that to help keep the weeds down, does that need all the other, the mulch, the humic, all that kind of thing, or is that more for the flowers?
I'd say that, because the question is, do you approach the planting of the seeds, the meadow mix, meadow rejuvenation kind of thing, the same way? I'd say it's probably a good idea. Same concepts apply as far as hydroseeding, mulching, fertilizing. I would say all those things are a good practice to
So in order
follow.
to spread the seeds, I'm sorry, to also mix in with the mulch and
Yes.
so on? Okay.
I would say that in general, just broadcasting seeds on an improved landscape is not going to be very successful. So, yes, ma'am.
I have to go out of town for a couple weeks, so is mid-February okay still to start?
Yeah, I'd say probably,
Otherwise I won't be here to water.
yeah, probably mid-February would be about the latest that would be good. So if you get them in by then, we should be in good shape. And probably better, as you're suggesting, is her question was about when to plant if you're going to be away. Better to plant a little bit later when you can water than plant and then we get some more mild weather and they dry out and they may not be as successful. So, yes, ma'am.
Plant meadow mulch, sorry, meadow seeds, we can do that now, right? Same as the wildflowers.
Yes, you can plant the meadow seeds as well. The regular grass seed that we have for turf, lawn, etc., that's usually April, October schedule. So I wouldn't work on those right now. It's still a little bit cold. That's a different animal, so to speak. But the wildflowers and wild grasses, they can all be planted now. Yes, ma'am.
Can we expect to have to redo this next year in this same area? Or will they regerminate enough that it won't have to be repeated?
That's a big question. Okay. Her question is, can you expect to go through this process next year? Or will everything be so wonderful that they'll have wildflowers everywhere? The answer is, I don't know. I mean, you may get some that do really well and some that maybe a little patch. Oh, this maybe could use some reseeding perhaps. So it really all depends on the weather, what happens with the animals, how well, how just growing conditions.
Well,
usually I think you can expect to get off to a fairly good start, but you may find that it can also be a couple years before you feel like it's fully filled in.
Wildflowers are a lot like regular flowers. There are perennials and there are annuals. So when you buy the seed, you obviously want to make sure there may be a few annuals that come up this year. And like Doug said, some of them are going to just come up and be green. There's not going to be flowers per se, but the perennials typically would then come the next year and then reseed after that. You know, I have a whole bunch of primrose on the side of a hill, kind of like the lady mentioned here, and they come up year after year after year. You know, I cut them back in about March and they reseed and come back up and so on. So it depends on which flowers you buy, and the mixes should have good perennial mixes. I think that's part of what we have down there is there's a lot of perennial seeds in there.
Thank you.
Right, so that's a good point. So some perennials, you may not really flower till the next year. The annuals, they may flower this spring, but not come back the next spring. And so it's sort of a mix and match, and I'd say that there's a possibility that you may need to reseed here and there.